Hello, welcome to another edition of What's Cooking. I'm Tim Paroli, and today we're going to show you something a little different and something that is very good for this time of year. It's very good for two reasons. First of all, it is easy to prepare. Secondly, it is very cheap to buy. The things that we are going to talk about today are winter squash. I have two varieties with me today, probably the most popular of the winter squashes, and this one is called an acorn squash, and the other variety that I have with me today is the butternut squash. Now today I'm going to show you several different preparations. One of them happens to be my favorite, and it's going to be the sauteed chicken filled into the acorn squash. We're going to show you the ingredients that we're going to use today, but the method is going to be a couple of different things, so we didn't want to give you a ton of written work for your method. So we're going to give you the ingredients. The ingredients that we're going to be using today is going to be some chicken breasts that I have, and they're already cooked. We're going to have chicken, onion, pepper, the two squashes, and we're going to have some flour, fat, and stock. And I'm going to explain some of the terms that aren't familiar to all of you as we go along and as we use them. The first thing that I want to show you is how you prepare the squash for the oven. Now, as I said, these are winter squashes, the kind that we're not mostly familiar with, and these are very hard on the outside. The flesh of the squash itself on the inside is a lot firmer, and it has a lot less moisture. They've also been called a storage squash because these, I purchased these a couple of weeks ago, and they're holding up very well. They'll hold up for a couple of months under ideal storage. And these I didn't even bother refrigerating. At room temperature, they seem to be holding up well. So I'm going to take the acorn squash first and show you how we do that. Now the first thing I want to show you on a close-up here is that the acorn squash has a lot of ridges in it. Now what we want to look for is two sides of it, because I'm going to split this end for end the way the squash is grown. We're going to split it long ways, and I want it to rest on two of these little ribs as close as I can. So if you're looking at it at home, you can see this side sticks out a little too much. So I'm going to roll it around till we get two that are close. That looks close. Okay, then I'm going to take a serrated knife because it's sometimes easier to cut through these with a nice serrated knife, and we saw right through the outside skin. Okay, now once I'm through the skin, I'm going to pull the knife out, and I'm going to separate the core of this squash with a larger knife. It's a lot easier, unless you're used to these, to start off with the serrated knife. Now with the large knife, and I'm going to give that a little hit, and there it goes, through the stem, and I've got the squash halved. All right, now if you see, the inside of this squash is just like any other squash or pumpkin, because they're all the same family, whether winter or not. And you can see this one has the pulpiness on the inside and the seeds. Now we're going to show you close up on how to scrape this out. And you just scoop that out very much like you would a pumpkin. So I'm going to scoop that, and I want to get these edges even. Although they don't grow even, there's no reason why we can't even them up for service so that they'll look especially nice. Now I've scooped that out, and you can hear that that is kind of a tougher kind of a squash. As I said before, it's not like anything like the summer varieties that we're used to, the yellow or the zucchini. This is a much firmer relative of that family. So we're going to clean them out, and then once we have the two of these cleaned out, we're going to score the inside with the knife. Now to score these is very simple. Just hold the squash and hold it down on the board, and take your knife, and we're going to make sure the hand is over one side, and we pull the knife through this way. A couple of cuts. Now a little close for my hand there, so I turn it around and I cut that again. I'm only cutting it in just a little bit. Now all the cuts so far have gone like this. The next set is going to go the other way, so I turn the squash, looking down into it with the point of the knife, and I put them about a ½ inch apart. And what that is going to do is going to open up the center of this squash when it cooks, so that it will cook a lot easier, it'll be more tender, it'll cut down on the cooking time, and it's going to let the seasonings that we're going to put in penetrate into the meat of the squash itself. So again, I'm going to cut this one. I'm turning it around like to keep a distance between my finger and the knife. Seems the way we get along best that. Okay, now they're both cut, they're both scored, and they're ready for the oven. Now, while I have those ready, the cooking time on this one and the other one is a little different. However, the method of preparation is basically the same. We take a butternut squash, and I'm going to halve this one lengthwise, taking off the stem so it doesn't give me any trouble, onto the board, and then we're going to split that in half. By setting the knife on there, this one is a little softer. I can go right ahead with the big knife, and I'm going to go right through. Okay. Now that one cuts much easier, and you can see the color is a little brighter, and this one seems has a lot more meat to it. This whole section is all the meat section of the squash itself, whereas the pulp and the seeds are just located down in this one end. So we scoop that out the same way. And again, this being the winter squash is very, very tough. It's very much like a carrot in its consistency, very, very similar. It's similar in its appearance. However, the taste of these, I find, when they're about this size, are much sweeter. And they're a very good substitution for carrots. Now we're going to do the same with this one, except that we're only going to do it on the pulp end of the squash. We're going to score that one like this. And they're at about a ½ inch to 1 inch apart one way, and go the other way. Okay, now we have this one is all scored and ready to go. So now we're going to show you how the squash is seasoned. Now what I have in front of me are different spices that I use the most. Now the spices that I generally like to have in front of me in the kitchen, I have fresh parsley. I use that for garnish when it's chopped. I use oregano, basil, salt, and pepper. Now I also have garlic powder and any other extra spices that I need. I have them on hand. And if it's a special dish that calls for something else or that particular kind of spice, then I'll have it. But the most of the foods that we'll cook will contain usually 2 to 3 of the 5 that I just mentioned. Now we take these and we season them. Now they're going to be seasoned with a little bit of salt over the top and a little bit in the cavity. Now this doesn't require much salt at all, just a little bit. And if you're on a salt-free diet or a low sodium, then you skip the salt. And a little bit of pepper. The pepper that I'm using, you probably won't even see it go on, is a white pepper. And it's very finely ground, and that's from the center of the peppercorn. So I'm watching as I put that on there. Because it's so fine and so small, it's harder to see, and some people put it on until they can see it, like black pepper, and wonder why everything is so hot. Okay, now that's in there. I'm going to rub that on there to make sure that goes in and into the cavity. Now the preparation that I'm showing you on these squashes is if you were to use them like we're going to use them to fill, or if you're going to use them as a vegetable. If you wanted to use these as a dessert squash, you can take the squash and prepare them just as I have here. Omit the butter, and with just a tiny amount of pepper, then you would take them, butter them, and this one gets baked on a baking pan like this for a ½ hour until it's tender. The other fellas get turned upside down and baked till they're tender, and these usually take only about a ½ hour. Although they're a lot harder, there's a lot less surface here to cook, and they do cook a lot faster than the butternut. Now, once these are cooked, the butternut will be like this. Now this butternut has been cooked just until it was tender, and I'm going to turn it over so you can see the bottom side of it. That's where it sat on the oven rack. Now this had only a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper in it, no butter or anything else, and you can see that this is nice and tender and ready to eat just like that, hot. Or you can refrigerate them as I did, and these are a very nice item to take, and you can put a little bit of jelly in this corner here, or a little brown sugar and cinnamon, sprinkle it over the top, cold, pop it in the microwave with a little bit of saran, and you've got yourself a nice hot treat that, except for the little bit of cinnamon and sugar, you're not talking about too many calories when it comes to a squash. Now the other preparations on the squash, other than cooking them whole, as I've set up and showed you here, is to take the butternut and peel the butternut squash, and it can be cut in a julienne, which is this. It can be cut into cubes like this one, or it can be shredded like this bowl. Now the nice thing about this squash, this particular squash, the butternut, I find that its flavor, as I said before, is much better than the carrot. It has a bright orange color to it, and it's really a different flavor for salads. I had a few of the kids were tasting this today and thought it was a real good tasting carrot. I'm sure that if you tell your kids you're going to feed them squash, they're going to wrinkle their nose. So let them try it first. Because of its appetizing color, they're going to try it and then ask you how it is. Now we're going to prepare the filling for the acorn squash. Now what we're going to use on the acorn squash to fill it are the ingredients that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to make a little room on the board here, and we're going to be all set to go. What we're going to do is take the chicken meat that I have here. All right, now what I did in the store, I'm sure you're familiar, you're walking down the meat and you get to the chicken in the meat department, and it has chicken breasts all by themselves, and then they have the chicken already on the bone. I bought the chicken breasts with the bone in them. First of all, they're a lot cheaper. Secondly, the nice thing that I got out of those was I got a little bit of stock out of these. Now, stock is one of the things I mentioned earlier that you may not be familiar with. What this is a chicken bouillon. Now, I did that by cooking the chicken off, pulling the chicken meat from the bones, and then I took the bones and the skin and a little bit of celery and onion, and I cooked it covered with water, and then afterwards I strained it. So that's the juice that I have. It's called stock. So there it is, the chicken stock. Now I have the chicken meat, and I'm going to slice those in a long, thin cut. What I'm going to show you is a variation of cuts today so that you can see how, even though the ingredients are the same, by mixing them different and cutting them different, you're going to come up with an appetizing and eye appeal in your platters. Now the chicken breast itself is kind of a long, thin, flat piece of meat, so we cut them long and thin. We want to get as much length from them as we can, and as I said, these are cooked. You could do this raw also, but the time it will take is a little bit longer and you won't get that stock. So now I'm going to prepare enough of this for 4, and I'm going to fill 1 or 2 squash today. So I'm going to take a couple of breasts here. I also have, if I'm done with this and I have some of this meat left over, I have nice chicken meat for a chicken salad, and that's nice inside of a squash after it's cooked. It can be served cold like that. So one thing on buying the chicken, you can buy now this is a half a breast each right here so far. So buying the chicken on the bone is a lot cheaper, and you get 2 things out of it. You add a little bit of your thyme and water, a little bit of onion and celery, and you get the stock. Whereas if you buy the breasts already boneless, you're not going to get all that extra. Okay. Now there is the chicken. I want to make sure they're all cut fairly uniform in their thickness so that if they're all the same, they're all going to cook about the same amount of time. And a saute dish or a saute item is one of those items that cooks very quickly. Now I have the chicken over here, and I'm going to just move that to one side. Now we're going to take and peel an onion. Now we've done an onion for you a couple of times before, and I've noticed a lot of times when someone is going to show you something, they tell you, well, just take an onion and dice it. But you're going to find that many, many recipes call for you to take an onion, peel it, and dice it. And that's one of the things that the more you see it, the easier it's going to become. So we're going to do the onion for you very quickly in a review. The first thing you do is you take your onion and you find out that this is the root end and that this is the stem end, or this is the end that would be protruding above the ground. So we're going to trim the end off the ground just a little bit, and we take the root end, as I told you before. This is what holds the onion together, and we're going to take off just enough so that we get down to the meat of the onion. Now you can see that. We're going to cut that little root button right in half because that will hold each half of this onion together. Now I'm not using a whole lot of onion today, so we're going to reserve the other half, and this one I'm going to peel. And we just peel back the first couple layers. This onion's got a little bruise in it. That's no problem for us. We take that right out. Now this onion is all set to be sliced or diced, whatever way we want to do it. And I think today with the onion, we're going to take this and cut it nice and long and thin also. So I'm going to take the onion, setting my hand on the top, and laying the knife against the edge of my knuckles. I'm going to take the blade of the knife down against the onion, very thin. Now the type of knife that I'm using is a knife that we discussed. It's called a French knife. A lot of the stores call them a cook's knife. Some of them call them a utility knife. They've been called French knives by professionals for years, probably because that's where they originated. And they have a nice wide blade that's nice for rocking and chopping, and they have a heel that's good for a lot of the heavy work. This blade is made for the type of pounding that you'll sometimes have to do with a knife in the kitchen. A regular slicing knife does not have that same quality steel and can chip or break on you. So now we have those cut long and thin. We're going to slide them over here. And we're going to add a little bit of green pepper for color. Now I'm not a big fan of green pepper, but in certain foods it seems to lend a flavor that I just can't get any other way. Now I'm going to show you what we do with the pepper. First thing we do is we lay the pepper down and we cut the pepper lengthwise. All right, now once that pepper is cut lengthwise, it's very easy to core and clean. We just pop that out, and that will take the whole core out of the top, and then we just pull the seeds and any of that webbing that stays inside that holds the seeds. A little tap will knock out any extra seeds, and I'm only using half a pepper today. Now the pepper I want to do long and thin also. An easy way to do a pepper is to lay it with the shiny side or the skin side down. Now this is especially important if you don't have a sharp knife. Laying it down that way and cutting through this way is going to be much easier for you and your knife. So I'm going to just cut them nice and thin. Now the nice thing about learning how to cut vegetables, although it may take you a little while and take you a bit of time before you can get it down to where you have it so that they'll come out looking the way you want and the uniformness of each slice. Once you learn it, it cuts down on your cooking time tremendously. Because these two vegetables happen to be cut so thin, they're going to require a very small amount of our time. Now, another vegetable that we're going to add is 1 rib of celery, and I'm going to take this and cut this on an angle. Now, I'm looking for, again, eye appeal in this platter. So I take the celery rib and I lay it down on my board, and we begin to cut it at an angle from which the celery has grown. Now I'm going to cut that in half to make it a little more manageable. Now you can see the celery grows this way. I'm going to cut at a 45. And the more I can cut that at a 45, the more of a slant I'm going to get, and the prettier the cut of the celery is going to be. The ripple on the top and the ribs that it's going to show, especially when it's cooked, the outside is going to be nice and dark. The inside is going to be light, and it's still going to maintain the crispiness that I'm looking for in this dish. All right, so now we have a little green and a little white. Now I want to add a little other color with my chicken. I'm going to add some of the julienne of butternut because we're going to stuff the acorn squash. I'd like to use a little bit of this other squash in there. This squash I find seems to lend itself better for being cooked as a vegetable. It's very nice to take, cube. You can cook it with a little salted water and whip them just like potatoes, and they come up really nice. Okay, now we have these ready, and the dish is a sauteed item, so the pan that we're going to be using today is a saute pan. Now, the difference in the two, this is commonly called a sauce pot, and this is a saute pan. The difference in the two is that one is made for a very high and large heat surface, which we have here. This one, the heat surface is a lot smaller. However, for this sauce pot to compensate for the small amount of surface that is struck by the heat, this one is very thick. You can see the edge of this pot is a very thick pot. A sauce pot you want thick because the thicker the pot, the less likely you're going to be to burn a sauce or anything that you're cooking, especially when you're going to be with milk or with any other kind of a sauce. And if we have time today, I want to show you the sauce and go over the sauce once or twice. I'm going to put this on a high heat. And the term saute is a kitchen term that means to cook something lightly and quickly in a small amount of fat. Now, if you're dieting or you're a little worried about the waistline like I am, that's encouraging news to eat sauteed food. With the exception that a lot of the sauces that we finish it with are finished with butter and finished with heavy cream. So if you finish them with milk and knock off the butter, you can watch the waistline and still enjoy some of the classical dishes. I'm going to let that heat up. Now, earlier I mentioned that in the ingredients that we could use any kind, it said fat, and I wasn't real particular about the type of fat, and flour. The flour and the fat are going to be used as a thickener. Now the type of fat, I have butter here which can be used, but I also have today, from when I cooked the chicken, when I saved the juice, on the top of the juice we skimmed off the fat. Now this fat I want to show you on the overhead because it is such a nice, these are all byproducts, by the way, of buying the chicken on the bone. Remember, all these things, I got the chicken fat for a less price than I would have for the bone chicken. That chicken fat is right there, and you can see that that is nice, and it's a nice clear product. To buy this on the market is very expensive. To make it by yourself is very simple. When you cook the chicken, you just take the chicken and pour the juice off into a pan, and again, pull the meat off the bones, take the bones into a saucepan, cover it with water, boil it for a couple of hours, and then you skim the fat off the top. So we're going to use that fat today to begin our saute dish. And what we're going to do is a little bit of that. And you can see the lines. I'm going to bring this over. You'll see the lines of the heat coming through this. There you go. Now you can see those little lines forming, and I'll put a little bit of cold, and you can see those lines. Now what that is the heat. And when you see those lines disappear, and the fat that you're using, if it's a liquid fat like this one, it's going to thin out. And when it thins out, you'll see it. Now you'll see a lot of chefs roll the pan, move themselves a lot, but they're going to roll the pan. The reason that you roll the pan around is to make sure that the oil puts the heat everywhere on the bottom of that pan. If you don't roll the pan, we're not going to get the even heat that we want. Okay, now that looks pretty good. Now I'm letting this get fairly hot. Saute items require a lot of high heat. And now we're going to put in the onion, the pepper, the celery, and the squash. Again, these go in because these are the raw items, so they're going in first. Now we're going to take and we're going to add a little bit of seasoning to this. I'm going to take and I'm putting in just a little bit of white pepper. The reason I'm using white pepper and not black pepper is that this sauce is going to be fairly light in color, and we don't want any specks in it. A little bit of salt. Now we make sure this is moving in the pan by sliding it around. We toss it over a couple times. And you can hear them as they hit the pan. And if you can hear them hitting the pan, you know that they're still nice and crispy. Now they're getting a nice shine to them. I want to show you this on the overhead. You can see that the color of the vegetables is becoming more intense. It's picking up the color very nicely, and the crunch of the vegetable is right in there. So now we're going to go back to the stove with these. Many of your sauté dishes that require a vegetable in them are going to be kind of oriental in their appearance, in that they're going to be very crunchy when they're cooked in the beginning. And then when the sauce is added to them and they're simmered a little bit, they're not going to be as crunchy as oriental food. But if you can adjust that to your preference by taking it and changing the cooking time, like if you're into a very crunchy type of food, then you could stop cooking these right now and you're all set to go. Myself, I like them cooked a little more in this kind of a dish. So now they're rolled over a couple of times, and we're going to make a little bit of sauce for this. Sauce, most people have trouble making gravy, making sauce. What we do is we're going to start off with a little bit of fat, and that goes into the pan. Now, I'm not measuring on this because the amounts are always going to vary. People tell me, well, gee, if you tell me the amounts, I'll know exactly what to do. I can give you the amounts of the thickener, but I can't guarantee the amount of drippings that you're going to get from a Thanksgiving or Christmas turkey or a roast chicken. So what I'm going to show you, you'll be able to judge. Now the first couple times you may not come up with it right on the money, but after about 3 tries you should have it down pat. First thing you do is you heat up your oil. Now the oil's hot. We add flour to this until it looks like wet sand. Now if you were to weigh this, most of the times when we weigh this, they weigh them out in equal proportions. But you don't have to weigh it if you just add it until you get the appearance that you want. Now, that's going to be mixed up. And over to the fire it goes. And we're going to let this cook for a minute. Now, being a small pan, this is going to cook very rapidly. If we were making a large batch of this, you want to cook that flour. You want to get that pasty taste out of the flour, and you do that by cooking it. So I'm going to let this cook for a minute, and then I'm going to get the ingredients ready that are going to be poured into that. Remember, that is the thickener. It's kind of made backwards. At first, it seems like it's, most people want to add the thickener to the juice or to the stock. We're going to do it the other way. You start off with the thickener in the bottom of the pan. Now I want to show you this now that it's cooking, and I'm going to take this over to the overhead and let you get a good look at it. Okay, there it is. You can see it's cooking. It's cooking very nicely. Get a good shot in there. Bubbling nicely, and the aroma of this is already beginning to change. The smell will pick up a bit of a toast or a nutty kind of a flavor. Okay, now that is cooked. I want to do this over the overhead so that you can see it. So I'm going to move back again, drive our camera crew a little crazy here. And I'm going to add this right to that hot roux. Right into the hot thickener goes that stock. And I'm going around. I always stir this in small circles so as I can whip it around and get all or any lumps that may want to form out of it and back over to the stove, and it's going to cook now. And I'm going to give this a stir every couple of minutes. This should boil in a moment or two. Then you can adjust. If it comes out too thin, you can cook it and reduce it down until it gets to the thickness that you like. If you take this and it's too thick, you can add a little bit of milk, a little more stock. You can thin it out with a little bit of water if you want to. Okay, now that's going to cook, and we're going to set up and get ready to fill our acorn squash. Now they've been taken. The acorn squash I'm about to show you were taken and were seasoned just the way we showed you today. They were set up and they were baked for about an hour. Then you take these acorn squash, and sit them. There we go. Now they're all ready to go. These can be set up and cooked the day before if you want. They can be done that far in advance, and they'll be ready to be stuffed. And then you can take them and fill them with this mixture that we're going to have here. There we have a little bit of the sauce ready. The vegetables go back on the fire. We're going to add the chicken meat to them. A little bit of our sauce. That will come to the boil very quickly, as it already has, since the sauce is very hot. Give this a light turn to the overhead. You see that it's very nice. And then we're going to fill the squash. Now by cutting these the way we have, they kind of stick out and lend a different dimension to the already round squash. A little bit of our sauce over top. A little chopped parsley. And then they're all ready to go. So if somebody asks you this week what's cooking, you tell them it's been acorn and butternut squash with sauteed chicken. Thanks for watching.